Hey, it's Jay, and I am excited today. It is brewing day. Woo! This is my brother-in-law, Craig. He's got a PhD in chemical engineering, but he's also got a PhD in brewing. So he's gonna be helping me today. We've got our home brew poured today. We've got some Oktoberfest that we're drinking.
The most crucial part of home brewing is that you start with a cold beverage.
I know, it is like 11 in the morning, but you know, we're just brewing, so
we round up.
It's part of it, yeah, we round up. Whether you're brewing small scale in a garage or you're brewing large scale in a brewery, the science and engineering behind it all is very similar. And we're gonna take you from start to finish through an entire brew. Today we're brewing Hefeweizen.
If you're new to brewing and just need a place to get started, just kind of learn a little bit about the process, I think this will be a good starting video to just outline the basic steps and hopefully empower you, because it's really not a very complicated process.
Before we really get started brewing, we're gonna show you the importance of sterilizing your equipment.
Basically, keeping your equipment clean is extremely important. So you will basically be introducing, this is our yeast here. We want this yeast to be kind of munching on all the sugars that we extract from the grains. If you have wild yeast or bacteria that get in there, can kind of make your beer taste funky and give it off flavors.
All right, let's start brewing.
Let's do it.
First step in brewing is making sure your equipment is clean. And so what we're gonna do is just do a quick rinse on a bunch of this stuff, maybe use a little bit of soap on it. But the product we use the most is Star San. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and mix it with warm water. It tells you the ratios on the back. And we're gonna have a couple of reservoirs of the Star San solution. We'll do a quick rinse and then on to the next step. Squeeze out a quantity. It needs either half an ounce or a full ounce per 5 gallons of water. So you squeeze it until the reservoir fills up. And then you take it, dump it in. This is a no-rinse solution, so we're able to sanitize all of our equipment without actually having to wash it off again with water. So you can sanitize it in here, pull it out, and then you use it. This is edible. Let your equipment soak for at least 10 minutes to kill all the bacteria. We're mixing up a solution of Star San in the mash tun. The Star San's an extra precaution to make sure that everything's clean before we put the grains in. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna take the Star San solution in the mash tun and move it over to the carboy, and then let the carboy soak before we add the wort, which will ferment into the beer.
So next step here, we're getting our kettle set up. And once we get that hooked up and get the propane ignited, we're gonna use that to heat our kettle, to heat our strike water up to the proper temperature. So that strike water will then be added to our grains to start our mash process, which is basically, you know, the equivalent to steeping tea. So we've got our propane set up. We're gonna go over and grab our kettle.
We just added 5 gallons of water, and we're gonna warm it up to 162 degrees Fahrenheit because that's the temperature we wanna add to the mash tun to get the grains to be 152 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where we're gonna extract all the sugars and starches out of the actual grains. We're using the Dark Star 2.0, which is a nice burner. When I first started brewing, I was brewing inside the house, and my wife wasn't too pleased with the smell. So I can brew out here and do complete garage brewing. So I just have a propane tank hooked up here, and then it's just super easy. Just turn the gas on, and boom, it's lit.
Our next step here, we're going to be activating our yeast. Today we have a Bavarian wheat blend yeast that we're using for this particular beer style of Hefeweizen. It's made by yeast, so that's one of the main manufacturers of yeast. So what I like about the Y yeast themselves, they have this the smack pack. So the yeast is basically in a liquid form inside the container, and then there's like a little kind of plastic reservoir that has a bunch of nutrients inside. So you basically can kind of feel where that is in the container and kind of isolate it to one corner of your bag. And then you basically can just give it a smack, and that'll basically explode all those nutrients out so they're available to the yeast. So that's what we basically did there. I usually will give it a couple whacks, and then you can kind of feel around for it and see. Give it a little shake, and what'll happen is over the next hour or so, you'll start to see the bag expanding as the yeast is basically converting some of these nutrients into CO2. You'll see the bag start to expand. It's kind of a nice check to know that your yeast is good before you put it into your fermentation vessel.
Just making sure the solution's getting in all parts of the tubes we're using. This is a hydrometer that we're gonna use to calculate our alcohol content later. We're gonna see how efficient our mash tun is by checking the specific gravity. This is the carboy. This is where we're gonna store our worts to become beer later. And we want to make sure that this is 100% sanitized. We don't want any impurities in here. Now with a glass carboy, please be super, super careful. I've seen terrible videos online of people who have dropped these and bad things have happened. So make sure you're handling them when your hands aren't soaking wet and just be really careful because they are kind of heavy and they're awkward. Now this is going to get everywhere, but I'm just going to go for it. We're using an infrared laser thermometer to monitor the temperature of the strike water. We want to make sure we don't go over 162 Fahrenheit.
We're gonna add our grains to our mash tun in anticipation of starting our mash. So we'll add our Pilsner malt in first here. This is our wheat malt here, which is crucial to making a Hefeweizen. Close.
Getting close. Craig's just stirring it. Water's evaporating off. We're down to 163. All right, and initially we kind of added the grains, and what we have to do is just stir everything up.
It smells so good.
Yeah, I know, it does smell good.
One of my favorite smells in the world.
I'm just going down with my spoon. I'm making sure that I don't really scrape the bottom too much. I don't want to disconnect anything at the bottom.
Now we got our mash all set up. We put in our strike water, and our temperature is right on target at 152. So we're going to basically seal this up and more or less let it sit for about an hour to basically let the natural enzymes that are in the grains kind of do their work and basically convert the complex sugars that are in the grain into more fermentable stuff. So next thing we're going to do is go ahead and start getting our sparge water heated up. You know, I'm an engineer, for God's sake.
I know, do two at once.
There's a smarter way to do this. I really wanted to show off I could try doing 3.
Okay, it's been about an hour. We just turned our sparge water off. We're at about 183 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're gonna let it cool off just a little bit and come down into the 170s. We just tested the temperature on this, and it's still around 152.
151, 152, yeah, sort of.
This
right about on target.
Really insulates well, so that's awesome. We're gonna drain the wort into the bucket and set it aside, and then we're gonna take the sparge water, we're gonna run the sparge over the grains, mix it a little bit, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then we'll take that excess wort out and then just try to pick up all the rest of the starch that's in there. When we put the sparge water in, it's going to be at 175 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. And at that temperature, what it does is it stops all the enzymes working inside the grains.
It smells great. Then I'll kind of slowly increase it. Like once you get a good flow going,
Yeah.
And you're satisfied that you have not stuck your sponge.
I know, right?
Have you ever stuck sparge, Jay?
I never have, but...
It's the worst. That will ruin your day.
Yeah.
And cause you hours of extra work.
As you can see, there's a little bit of grain at the bottom here, and we're gonna take that. Once this gets up to a little bit of volume, we're gonna take it and then put it back in and kind of recycle it through. We don't want all the grains going into our boil, so we're gonna try to separate them out. Once it sets, we're gonna end up with really no grains coming out at all. So we've collected a little bit of wort here. There's some grains mixed in. We have a good flow. I'm just gonna decrease this flow. I'm just gonna take this and dump it back in here. And I'm gonna start back up real slowly. And hopefully this time we're not gonna have many grains.
Looks pretty clear. That's a little bit of residual grain, but that's not a big deal at all. So now we'll drain the rest of this and then move on to the sparge. So we have just finished off draining our what's called our first runnings.
We got about 3.5 gallons of the 5 that were originally put in. The rest was soaked up by the grains in here. And so we're gonna take this bucket and we're gonna set it aside. We just sterilized this lid. I'm gonna put this on here for now so we don't get any bugs or anything else in there. We're gonna start sparging. Once our pot's available, we're gonna take this and we'll put it inside the pot. We just do this.
Yep.
Keep the hose sanitized.
Yep, that works.
Put that in there.
Yeah, right in range, 170 something.
Yeah, we're about 174 to 175. You want to be between 170 and 180. Anything? All right. So we're just doing a batch sparge where we're gonna add this in. Some people like to trickle their sparge in and have a constant flow. We're gonna add all 4 gallons of this at once, and then we're gonna put the lid back on and let it sit for 10 minutes. And then hopefully anything left in the grains will be extracted. I'm just gonna stir up the grains one more time. So anything that's kind of plugged on the bottom, see all that air coming up? Everything that's plugged is unplugging. And we're essentially washing the grains right now. At this temperature, you're not going to get many more active enzymes in here. So there we go.
As always, be careful. This is still very hot. Smells amazing.
Does smell really good. Is it 2 weeks later yet?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's gonna be a little lighter this time. Since we're kind of washing through. So you get a nice clear the final word out.
So from the sparge, we recovered about almost 4 gallons of wort, which is great. The grains have already absorbed everything in there, so they really can't absorb anything more. And so this just really extracts anything that's left. And so we're gonna add it to our concentrated wort. 7.5 gallons almost.
Great.
So we'll probably have about 5.5 gallons when we're done after we boil.
Yeah.
So for now, we're gonna put the lid on, we're gonna light this up and try to bring this up to a boil as quickly as we can. Okay, we're coming up on a boil. Once we get to a boil, we're gonna start our hop schedule too. So you wanna make sure you know your hop schedule and pay attention to the timing while you're boiling.
Checking, it looks like we are just coming to a boil now, which is perfect.
All right, and now we have to add our first round of hops, which is Hallertau. We're gonna add 1 ounce. We're using the German Hallertau premium hops. You see we're really boiling now. We're about 15 minutes from the end of the boil. We've boiled off over a gallon wort now. And we have next stage of our hop schedule. We've got the Northern Brewer Premium Hop Czech Saz. We only need about 1/4 of an ounce. Now this is more of an aroma hop. Hefeweizen isn't very bitter. So as we add this in, I'm just kind of estimating here. So when we call aroma hops, they give it more flavor than bitterness, which is nice. So unlike an IPA, which is a very bitter hops. About 10 minutes out, and I always add a pinchful of Irish moss. Irish moss actually helps coagulate the proteins in the wort and helps them drop out. Now with Hefeweizen, it's a pretty hazy beer, and so we're not going to add a lot because we want to leave that haze. We don't want our beer to be crystal clear, but it's not a bad idea to have some of your proteins fall out of solution. So I add just a little bit. That's about it. This is called a wort chiller, and it's a double wort chiller. It's a copper pipe, and it's bent with a row around the middle and then a row around the outside, so that it gives it extra area to extract heat from the wort. Before the boil is done, we've got about 8 minutes left on the boil. I'm just gonna place this in here. And what it's gonna do is, since it's boiling, it's gonna kill any impurities that might be on the wort chiller. Just gonna keep this bucket here to keep the hoses off the hot metal.
So we're now at the end of our boil. We're gonna go ahead and turn off our propane here. You don't need to be heating this anymore. It's boiled long enough. So now we wanna cool. Ideally, the faster you cool, the better.
I highly recommend you back far away when you turn the hose on, because as it goes through that first time, the pressure kind of makes the hose fly everywhere.
Ready, Jay?
Ready. All right, good. Wasn't too bad that time. Absorbing heat rapidly from the wort. The temperature difference is pretty great. So we're down to 86.0.
Yeah, 85,
86 degrees Fahrenheit. And then one trick we do is we check the exit hose temperature. And what do you get it for every day? 86.
Yeah, pretty much it's exactly the same.
So when they're close in temperature like that, then there's not much heat exchange going on. And unfortunately, living in Florida, that's one of the negatives of not having cold tap water here. The ideal temperature would be 68 degrees Fahrenheit before you pitch the yeast. So you want to try to cool it down as much as you can. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. All right, here we come full circle. We have our wort here ready to go. It's cooled off now. And we've got our carboy that's been sanitized. And I just want to get this a little bit higher, so I figured it'd be a good idea just to grab some old chemistry books. And we're just gonna put this right under. Let's just check the temperature one more time. Yeah, we're still around 86 degrees Fahrenheit. So the ambient temperature is actually warmer than that, so we're not gonna get much cooler. So let's do we're gonna do a hydrometer reading.
This is our hydrometer right here. It's in sterilized solution, or sanitized solution I should say. We're gonna drop it in, see what our original gravity is. So this is gonna help us after we do our fermentation. We'll take a final gravity, and the difference between those two will tell us about the ABV, or how much alcohol is in the final beer. I'd say 1.047 I think would be a reasonable approximation.
Okay, and because it's an 86 degree Fahrenheit temperature, we're gonna have to do some sort of calculation to convert it. The standard temperature for a hydrometer is 68 degrees Fahrenheit to get an accurate reading. So there's a conversion for the temperature. So remember 86 degrees and 1.049? 1.047. All right, and then we just have to grab our siphoning hose. And to be honest, it's not a bad idea if you get a lot of oxygen mixed in with it, or bubbles are created. It doesn't matter if it falls pretty far, because at this stage
you want oxygen.
You want oxygen in your beer, because the yeast is going to go to work, and they use oxygen when they convert the sugars to alcohol.
So we are now down to our final step. We have our final chilled wort here in our carboy, and the only thing we are lacking now is our yeast here. So if you remember before, we had the smack pack, and we activated the smack pack by basically smacking this thing real hard, and basically releasing the nutrients from the inner plastic container. And I don't know if you can appreciate it, you probably can from before, but it's developed a good amount of pressure now, so that tells us our yeast is fermenting and it's active, and it's good to use. So what I like to do is just dip this in our sanitation solution real quick, which we have below us here.
It's right down here.
And then you want to give it a good shake. You can't hurt the yeast, but you want to make sure that the yeast gets into a nice suspension, so when you pour this in, you're getting most of the yeast out and you're not leaving any at the bottom of the container. So we're going to go ahead and just open this baby up. And go ahead and pour it in.
It smells good.
It smells amazing. Smells like beer.
Smells like beer. This is our airlock. We just used the sanitized water to fill it. And we're just gonna drop this on. What happens is, this is gonna go right on the top of the carboy, and CO2, as the sugars ferment into alcohols, are gonna come up through here, and they're gonna collect in this little lid right here. That lid's gonna lift up, but because it's in solution, all right, eventually, the CO2 will bubble through the solution and then come out that way, and nothing will go in. Nothing will go through the water, the sanitized water, and back into the beer. So it keeps it sanitized while it's fermenting. We don't introduce any other crazy things. Just rubbing the whole thing.
Star San is your friend.
Yeah, just wash it one more time with Star San. So I'm just gonna put it like that. It's really nice having a second person.
Yeah, it makes it easier.
Here, I'll hold it if you want to just open that.
Okay. You're in?
Almost.
Got it. Okay.
The airlock.
Just put the airlock back on. Yeah, we good. Perfect. Cheers.
Cheers.